Hi, and welcome back. This is the second video for the first mobile development course. In this video, I'm going to sort of follow up on some of the things from the last video in terms of acceptable versions of things and workarounds that you might use if you use some of the alternate services I talked about for getting access to a Mac. I'm also going to, I guess most importantly, introduce you to the Xcode development environment and walk you through developing your very first application. So why don't we start that? So I just clicked on Xcode, and this is the screen I get. I get three choices of things, or actually I get a bunch of choices of things I want to do. I can get started with a playground. Didn't really want to do that. So this is a good enough. We'll go back to that screen. The idea of getting started with a playground is that you want sort of an interactive environment to play around with the Swift programming language in a command line kind of environment. It actually feels a fair amount to me like programming in BASIC on an old early 1980s, late 1970s microcomputer like an Apple II or a TRS-80 or something. Where you've sort of got full control over the machine and no windows or mouse or anything to try to keep track of. And we're going to use that some in Module 2, but we won't be using it quite yet. You can create a new Xcode project. That's what we're going to do. You can open an old one. I've got a couple old ones here. And I'll be making yet another version of my absolute favorite program in the world, Hello World, for this class. Or you can clone an existing project using a repository. And we'll talk about version management in the future. But for now, what we're going to do for most of the first projects for this term, we're going to create a new Xcode project. I'll come back to those versions in that text window screen there. You get a number of design patterns to choose from. What this is going to control is how much and what type of code is generated automatically for you. An iOS project consists of a number of Swift files that do various things, and how much they are pre-populated with code is based on what you pick here. It's fairly obvious, I think, what most of them are. A single view app uses just one view controller. A view in iOS is basically a screen, um, and or a certain layout of things on the screen, and all the associated code with making the things on that screen work. If you have more than one screen, you're going to be using a different design pattern. Maybe you're coding. You can actually build a multi-view app from the single view app pattern. It's all up to you. But there are a couple of multi-view patterns that you could pick from. There's a master detail app that's mostly used on iPads, where the screen real estate problem is not so dire. One of the biggest issues related to mobile phone development is the very limited screen real estate you've got compared to a desktop machine. All of you have taken the 2713 course, Software Construction, where you develop Windows applications in C#, and you've all seen how uh, you can have multiple windows open at a time, and that's just not a problem. Here, really, there's just one screen that's going to be open at a time, and you've got to kind of transition between them. So there's a page-based app and tabbed app that help you with that. There's document-based app where you're primarily interacting with some text document, an iMessage app where you want to embed the iMessage engine into your app, augmented reality and game, sort of clear what those are. And but we're not going to be using any of those for a while. For the most part, for this course, we'll be using a single view app, and even for the multi-view apps toward the very end. The first few we're going to write, we're going to handle implementing the multi-view code ourselves. There are also choices on here for developing frameworks, which are a Swift thing, and were an Objective-C thing before Swift, or a library, which are like DLLs, if you're coming from the Windows world, um, a piece of code that you link in either statically or dynamically with an existing app. Say you're writing a library of functions to do something um, in particular. We're not going to be doing any of those for the next little while either. So we'll pick single view app, which is going to generate for us the files, and within those files, the classes and methods that we need to get started on an iOS app with a single view. We'll also get that single view controller, which is the code that controls the view, implemented for us. We come to a screen where we specify a name for our product. This is the name that's going to appear in the underneath the icon. I'm going to use a naming convention that's kind of cumbersome. I'll call it Hello World Demo for this class, just so it all gets associated with the class. And so there. As far as team goes, if you're part of a design development team, you could fill it in here. Auburn actually has a developer account, so that's pre-populated here, but you can certainly sign apps with your own personal Apple developer account. I recommend you go ahead and get one of those from developer.apple.com. It's free unless you want an enterprise account, and I believe it's $99 for an enterprise developer account. You need the enterprise developer account if you're going to sell things on the App Store. Organization name, I'll just put my own name. Organization identifier, this is the one I use. You can really put anything you like here. It's really just sort of to make sure that things sit in global namespace. And they typically look like URLs written backwards. So we're in the CSSE department at Auburn, and it's a university, so auburn.edu is our URL. So flipping that backwards, edu.auburn.csc is my organization identifier, and then I get a bundle identifier for the whole thing, which is this line of text here, and it's the organization identifier with the product name tacked on. We're going to program in Swift. The other option would be Apple's older language, Objective-C, which I mentioned in the last video. We're just not going to be doing any of that this semester. But the capability is still there if you need to edit an existing Objective-C project or for some reason create one. Using core data, this is a facility that'll link in another framework that lets you gives you certain capabilities. We'll be doing that in the second mobile development course, but not in this one. And also, there's a facility for unit testing and user interface testing to be incorporated into the project. But for now, we're not going to do those things either. Then it asks you where you want to put your project. You can see I have quite a few projects. You just specify a directory here. I have one called iPhone projects, and I recommend you use some name that's descriptive to you for all your projects. And the files that are created are going to get put into a subdirectory in this directory. If you want to share your project with someone else, and in particular, you're going to want to do that when you hand in your assignments, you're going to want to share it with the TA by uploading it to Canvas. You can just zip the directory that the project is in and upload that to Canvas. So let's create a project. And all these files here have been templates for them have been created, and they all sit in this directory, which in the file system is in that directory we said. I'm going to go to my home. I put my directory in my home directory, which is Chapman 2, and it's called iPhone projects. You can see all those projects are in there, but in particular the one I just created is in there. And it's called cpsc5333. um, Hello World demo. I go into that directory and I see there's the project file itself. This is the this is pretty similar to any other integrated development environment you've ever used. It's like Visual Studio in 2713. It's just Apple's particular format for things. So this file with an extension Xcode project is the one that has the information on this project screen that's pulled up here. It basically tells what what's needed to know about building this project, all the files that are in it, and so forth. And then there's another directory, and that's where the actual code is contained, and the things with an extension .swift, the app delegate, and the view controller are our source code. P-lists are a way of storing data in a file that's specific to Apple. We'll look at a P-list a little bit later in the course. Assets are things that like images, like in this case the icons, are certainly always going to be assets associated with a project. There are a variety of icons depending on the different resolutions you need um, to support for the different models of phones you're targeting. We haven't built anything yet, so there's nothing in there yet. But anyway, that's where things sit in the file system. It's all in that directory that you specified for your iPhone's project. Each project has its own directory, and then within that directory there's the Xcode proj file, which is the file that sort of controls everything, and the source code and any assets that are needed. So let's talk about some of the things that are here. If we go to the project file, we can specify a number of things. If you're using a newer version of Xcode than Xcode 9, I'm going to ask you to target the deployment target 11.3. That was the version of iOS for the 8 Plus, and it's sort of a nice stable version that's good to use. So if I've got Xcode 9.6 installed here, and 11.3 is the highest version of Xcode that I can generate code for. If you're using Xcode 10, this goes up to 12.1, but I ask you to choose 11.3. You shouldn't have to change anything else here in the project file. There's also a list of targets, things that you're aiming the project to what do you want to build the project for? And the deployment target is set down here. As far as devices go, you can specify for iPhone, iPad, or Universal. We'll come back to this where you specify where to get the icons for. If you need to embed any frameworks or binaries, you do that here as well. And if you're aiming to sign the app to release it, to implement it on a real device, install it on a real device, you can self-sign apps since Xcode 7, so you don't have to have an enterprise developer account to put things on a real device anymore. These error messages are because I haven't actually logged in as a legit developer yet. Let me go back to the projects, target. You'll notice across the top here are a bunch of different sets of targets that you can aim for. For now, we don't need to change any of these things. I'm just pointing you that they're here. And didn't mean for that to come out. There's a if we go to build settings, I am looking for the place where I specify the format that I want this project file to be compliant with, and I'm not seeing it. Here we go. In general, the things that will appear in the left-hand part of the Xcode screen are called uh, um, navigators, and what they do is let you easily access things through a variety of information sources. And this is the what we're looking at here is the project navigator, which shows us all the pieces of our project. But there are various other navigators up here. Um, there's an object navigator. Um, there's an error navigator, a test navigator, debug navigator, breakpoint navigator, and uh, repository navigator. But for now, we're just going to leave things at our project navigator. In the middle of the screen is where the meat of the work typically happens. That is, if you're editing a file, if you're creating a user interface with the interface builder, modifying storyboards, you do all that. All your real heavy-duty work appears in the middle here. You'll see at the bottom there will be a console that sort of tells you how things are going. If you've asked for a compile um, um, or a simulation or something, the status of that shows up down here. And then in the right-hand side of the Xcode screen are things that are called inspectors. And I guess we've presently got two, a help inspector and an identity inspector. Identity inspector kind of tells you what things are. But the thing that I was after, and the reason I wanted to go to this in particular, is if, again, you're using a newer version of Xcode than I am, that is, if you're using something newer than 9.3, you'll have a higher choice here. There'll be an Xcode 10 compatible project format. Always select Xcode 9.3 compatible so that I'll be able to read your project. You're also going to have to make some edits to the code. I'll get to that a little bit later. So let's actually get to some code. There are two code files associated with any iPhone app. One's called the app delegate, and what you'll see in here are a bunch of function prototypes. These would override definitions, sort of default definitions of these functions, and you're welcome to do them, to modify them if you want to. You don't have to modify any of them, and we're not going to modify any of them. But I should talk a little bit about what a delegate is in the sense of a Swift program. In diplomacy, a delegate is someone whom you task with doing things for you. And that's what a delegate is in the world of iOS apps as well. Anything that the app needs to do, the methods in the delegate are what get called. There's not really a main in the sense that a Java application has a main or a C++ application has a main. There's some hooks into an application where the operating system calls them. They're here, and they're underneath this. This is a Swift directive that tells us that this is the main portion of an application, but you won't see an actual method called main. Also, Swift is an object-oriented language, so you see that things are organized into a class, and in the class there are data members, which have the keyword var in front of them, and functions, which have func as the func as the initial keyword. I don't want to talk about Swift syntax in this video. That's going to be Module 2 stuff, but just know that these functions are here, and that you need to deal with them. Now, in particular, there's a difference between iOS 11.3 and iOS 12 that shows up in the way the templates are written. The launch options key, which you don't really need to worry what is the type of it is UI application launch options key, all one word if you're using iOS 11.3. If If you're using Xcode 10 and iOS 12, that's split into a class and a member name. And you can see that caused an error when I put that period in. So we'll take that out. Actually, we're going to take the whole thing out because we're not going to override this main application function in our code. So we're perfectly happy with the one that's in the superclass. I haven't talked about class notation, but what these tell you is that the app delegate class implements two other class, UI responder and UI application delegate. And that's where we're going to get that method from, not from our own declaration. There's also a view controller. Since we don't have anything in our view, this is really simple at this point. The only two functions you find in here are a function view_did_load that runs when our view loads, and one that runs if we get a low memory warning. And we'll talk more about how those things work in the future. Again, just want to sort of show you where things are. We're not even really expecting you to understand the syntax at this point. Another function I want to, or thing I want to point you to, is what's called a storyboard. And the storyboard is in a tool called the Interface Builder. And you're looking at the Interface Builder here, which lets you graphically design a screen. And that's where we're going to start. In the next video, we're going to start creating our first app by putting some text on the screen. And that's really all our app's going to do. It's going to throw up the text on a screen until you terminate execution of the app. But I'll bring this video to a close and see you in the next video.